4:06 on WMAL. Dan Mandis in for Vince Coglianese. Happy Friday to you. You know, there is so much political intrigue going on with Hunter Biden. You got Joe Biden. You got all of the stuff going on with the DOJ. They're going after Donald Trump. You know, there is some work that needs to be done, and that's why I'm so glad to have Congressman Matt Rosendale here on the line representing Montana's 2nd Congressional District. And want to talk about the upcoming appropriations fight. Congressman, thanks very much for being on WMAL.
Thanks for having me on today, Dan. Appreciate it.
So let's talk a little bit about this fight, because I'm assuming it's not only going to be a fight, it's going to be a big fight. Not only are, fiscally conservative Republicans going to be fighting Democrats, as we always do, but also you'll be battling some Republicans as well. Kevin McCarthy, of course, Speaker McCarthy, he's in a tough spot because, he has to find consensus amongst all Republicans. How big of a fight, do you believe this is going to be? And I should preface all of this by saying you are one of the more fiscally conservative Republicans in the House. And so you are really going to hold the line on responsible spending.
That's exactly right. Dan, I find myself in the minority regardless of whether the Republicans are in the majority or the minority. I'm in the minority of the minority, or I'm in the minority of the majority. But I'm always in the minority because I do not believe in spending more than we bring into the federal coffers. We're going to bring in somewhere in the neighborhood of about $5 trillion this year, okay? We had a large discussion, if you will, back in January about what we were going to do moving forward with the 118th Congress. And that debate that took place over several days was not only about who was going to be the speaker, but it was also about the rules that we were going to use to conduct operations of the House. And during that time period, there were certain assurances that were given that, number one, we were going to have regular order restored to the House so that when legislation was brought to the floor, that it wasn't sifted or screened through the Rules Committee first. It was going to be brought to the floor to have open debate so that people could propose amendments to it, okay? We were assured that we were going to have the ability to vote on a balanced budget amendment. We were assured that we were going to have the ability to vote on a balanced budget, a term limit amendment to the Constitution. None of these things have transpired. But something else that we also were assured that we were going to have is, for the first time in, I think, 4 years, we were going to have proper funding of the government through the appropriation bills. There are 12 bills that are supposed to be passed that designate how much money is going to be spent on the federal government and what it will be spent upon. And those go through the appropriate committees. They discuss it, they debate it, and then they send it out to the floor for approval. We have been able to do that on one of the 12 bills. That's the military construction VA. And we were able to get that and get it approved and passed. Okay, we've got 11 more. They have known this not just for the last 9 months since we elected a new speaker, but they've known that for several years. This is the way the system is supposed to work. And now, September 30, they know that we are not going to have the funding available for the federal government, and the appropriation bills haven't been passed. And what we have watched over the last several years is this has been a tactic of Nancy Pelosi to wait until the last minute, not pass the appropriation bills, pass a continuing resolution which funds government at its current levels. Well, the current levels, Dan, are about $2 trillion more than what we're going to bring in revenue. And it includes a bunch of really, really bad stuff that the Biden administration passed during the last Congress. So we're going to have a continuing resolution that comes forward that says we're going to continue to fund government at its current levels with all the bad crap in it. And then we haven't passed the appropriation bill, so what they're going to do is then try to get an omnibus at the end of the year, which we know will be a pork-laden, several thousand-page document with 7,000 earmarks in it from individual representatives that want special treatment for things in their district. And so what does this sound like? It sounds like the exact same way that Nancy Pelosi ran Congress. So you tell me, what's the difference between having a Speaker Nancy Pelosi and a Speaker Kevin McCarthy?
So one of the things that you, and I agree, one of the things that you have asked for is that you want to see all of the 12 appropriations bills totaled up, and that way you can see them all right there, totaled up. One is this amount, another is this amount, another is this amount.
Yeah, and know what the sum total of them.
Well, that is basic, business bookkeeping, and so and you're right. There is going to be, seems to me, like a big time battle. And by the way, if I remember right, if you have a stopgap measure, is there a 1% cut if you're unable to pass it?
Dan, that's 1%, okay, based upon the 23 expenditures.
Yep.
So we've got $2 trillion of additional spending in the federal budget that's been tacked on since COVID. So that's like going to the dress store on Wednesday and seeing a dress for $75 and then going back on Saturday for the sale, and it's marked up to $100 and it says we're going to take $10 off, and so it's down to we're going to take 10% off. So it's down to $90.
Yeah.
Right?
So in other words, the 1% really is
more.
Yeah, the 1% is meaningless, and I guess it sounds as we're going through all of this. Some would say that perhaps the Republicans, and I realize we can all walk and chew gum at the same time. Critics would say, though, okay, well, the House Republicans, they're so busy investigating the Bidens that they can't get the budget passed. And so, I understand why some would say that's a fair criticism. I believe that this is sadly business as usual in Washington, D.C., which is exactly the opposite of what we wanted when we voted a Republican majority in the House of Representatives. So what happens to Kevin McCarthy at this point?
That's a good question, because I will tell you what I see this as. I see this as a complete and total failure of leadership to do what they were supposed to do, which is allow the committees to do their work to complete the appropriation bills. This is what our number one job is to get the appropriation bills done so that we can properly fund government. And properly fund means that we strip away the parts of government that are being weaponized against the American citizens. What is the role of government? What do I take an oath to do? My job is to protect your rights. That is my job. Your rights come from God, and my job is to make sure we protect them. So part of the appropriations process is to strip out the parts of government that are violating your rights. This is my basic job. And when leadership does not allow, and that's all it is, they don't allow for that process to take place, and then they push us into this emergency situation. There's an old saying that I use a lot. Your failure to plan does not cause an emergency on my part. So now this is being used as a ploy. I'm sorry, but I am to the point that I think that this was planned so that they could utilize this continuing resolution, keep their funding in place, and then jam everybody at the end of the year with this omnibus. This is the definition of the uniparty. That's all it is.
This is what they do. They do this. I've been hosting talk shows a long time, and I have a joke on my regular show in Nashville where it's like, I'm not going to be drawn into this again, where it's like, oh, they're going to wait. Oh, my God, government shutdown. And then all of a sudden, here comes the continuing resolution, the omnibus, and nothing ever gets fixed. I'll never forget the comment from Janet Yellen. I think this was last year. Or earlier this year, where she said, we have to raise the debt ceiling so we can borrow more money. And it was like, are you kidding me? So we're not even talking about trying to cut spending or even balance a budget. We need to raise the debt ceiling so we can borrow more money. There's not a business in America or the world that can operate like that. But somehow our government, Republicans, think that that's a good way to run the country. It's ridiculous, including, President Biden is asking for another $24 billion in Ukraine as part of this emergency funding. I mean, where do you stand on that?
Well, I've been very, very clear about that. When they brought the first resolution forward, okay, to give unlimited financial and military support to Ukraine, I was one of 3 people that voted against it. And I took a lot of heat for that. It was myself, it was Rep. Gosar out of Arizona, and Rep. Thomas Massey out of Kentucky. And I said, there is no way that I am going to sign off. It wasn't binding, but I wasn't going to sign off and give the perception that I was willing to give unlimited, and that's what it was calling for, unlimited military and financial aid to Ukraine, okay? 3 years ago, whenever anybody invoked the name of Ukraine, what they said very quickly thereafter was that the place is being used as a laundromat for dirty money for dirty politicians, starting with Hunter Biden. And then all of a sudden Russia invaded, and it's tragic, and it was unprovoked, and I have supported every resolution against Russia trying to get them out of Ukraine. But we can track about $30 billion worth of weapons that we have sent there. And that's because it was actually weapons. The 70, 80, 90 billion dollars worth of financial aid, we don't even have a good accounting of. We don't know where it's going. And the way that Biden is trying to entice or box the Republicans in to signing off on this additional funding that's going to Ukraine is by saying he's going to send $4 billion down to the southern border for security. Guess what? $3.5 billion of that is going to be used to build housing and provide assistance to the illegals. If you build housing and provide assistance to illegals right there on the border, all you are going to do is incentivize additional illegal immigration and entice more people to come across. So that whole supplemental is nothing but a disaster.
You know, it is interesting, too, because I remember when, Russia invades Ukraine, one of the most corrupt countries in the world. You've got the weak sanctions that Biden was implementing on, Russia and Vladimir Putin and some of the people around him. And you folks did take a lot of heat. And now I think it's roughly 50% of the American people are saying enough with the Ukraine funding. So I wonder, and I'm just going to ask you, you were against it from the start. And it turns out it looks like you were right. And so when you go back to how you were heavily criticized to where you are now, where people probably are looking at you and saying, Congressman, you were right 3 years ago to have concerns about this. Has anybody come up to you and said, and said, yeah, you know what, go ahead, say it, you were right?
They have. I've spent the last 2 weeks traveling around my home state here, Montana. Thank goodness. That's one thing we have been able to figure out a little bit. And that is to go ahead and get scheduling done better, because the Democrats, every year you're supposed to go back to your district during August, and for some reason or another, in 21, they called us back in for votes. In 22, they called us back in for votes. So we are here for the whole month, and I've traveled around one end of the state to the other, even though I'm officially only representing the eastern 3/4 of Montana. I have a lot of invitations to go over to the western side as well, and a lot of people have come up and said, you were spot on. Some of them said, we agreed with you from the beginning, but I have had a fair amount of folks come up and say, I wasn't sure about that, but by golly, you were 100% spot on by standing up and saying, hey, how about fixing our southern border before we start sending money overseas to get involved in a conflict in Ukraine?
So, last question here, and I could go on with you for an hour, sir, because there's so much to talk about with this appropriations process and the money being spent. Do you have a prediction as to, one, how is this fight going to go? Will you get anything that you're asking for, particularly the 12 appropriations, all at once so that you can, sum it out? That's number one. And number two, will Kevin McCarthy be able to survive this?
So I think that I'm honest with people. I tell people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. And I've been very clear going across the state that this is the process that I see playing out. CR, omnibus. And I started saying it 2 months ago, as soon as Kevin McCarthy struck his deal with Biden and extended the debt ceiling out until January of 25, instead of giving us the ability to incrementally deal with the debt ceiling. He took away all of the leverage, all of the negotiating power that the House of Representatives had. And Kevin McCarthy stood in front of the conference and said, I, Kevin McCarthy, made that decision by myself and offered it to the president because I think that we will be in a bad position next year, the election year, to do something about it. And it's like everybody is tired of hearing all we have to do is get the Senate, all we have to do is get the White House, and all we have to get is this, and all we have to get is that. We have to do what we can with the tools we're given, and he gave away the ability for us to have any kind of leverage whatsoever. So because of that, I believe it set all of these next events into play, which we're going to have a CR, and I think we're going to have an omnibus. All I can control is what comes out of the House, okay? Yeah. And that is what the appropriation bills were for. I can't control what the Senate sends us, and so he's doing away with that. And I'll go back to my original statement. What's the difference between Speaker McCarthy and Speaker Pelosi? If he's going to hit us with a CR and an omnibus, what's the difference? Will he survive it? That I don't know, but I can tell you something. There's a lot of people that are looking back at that debate that we had in January, and they're looking at the 6 people, myself, Rep. Andy Biggs, Rep. Eli Crane, Rep. Bob Good, Rep. Matt Gaetz, and Rep. Lauren Boebert, and saying, golly day, maybe you guys saw a little bit of something that we weren't aware of.
And we'll leave it there. Congressman Matt Rosendale, 429 News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Dan Mandis in for Vince Coglianese. Coming up, Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, representing Arizona's 8th Congressional District. Going to talk all about Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and that corruption next on WMAL. .436 News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Dan Mandis in for Vince Coglianese. Hope you're having a great Friday. I want to welcome on into the program Debbie Lesko, Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, representing Arizona's 8th Congressional District. And Congresswoman, I got to tell you, there is so much going on as far as the House of Representatives, and you've got the appropriations battle, you've got what's going on the southern border, you've got all of the corruption going on, of course, with Joe Biden. How are you folks in the House of Representatives? How are you trying to fit it all in? I mean, are you able to get everything done? And by the way, we can also talk about the many articles of impeachment that have been filed against the president.
Well, thank you for having me on. And yes, we are very busy. And as you said, we're doing lots of investigations. So the Oversight Committee is combined with the Ways and Means Committee and the Judiciary Committee in the House. And they're investigating Joe Biden, Hunter Biden's business partners. And the more they uncover, the more it looks like Joe Biden is implicated in this. And so I'm one of those congresswomen who believe we should proceed with an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden because it gives the House more authority to get documents and information.
Let me ask you, Congresswoman, because there is a lot of news. It almost feels like every single day there's more news on Joe Biden. We, of course, now woke up this morning, last night. We heard about the fact that the president using pseudonyms, these fake email addresses, Robert L. Peters, Robin Ware, JRB Ware, and so forth. And it does seem to me that there clearly is enough evidence, whether you call it circumstantial or not, but there's enough evidence at the very least to rise to an impeachment inquiry. From where you sit in the House of Representatives amongst Republicans, is there a pretty strong consensus at this point now that Speaker McCarthy has come out and given an indication that, yes, he is willing to have that conversation? Where is the total body of Republicans on an impeachment inquiry?
Well, I would say the vast majority are in favor of it, and we have to have a vote on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives, and none of the Democrats will help us, I expect. And so that means the Republicans need to come through. Now, we have not been in Washington, D.C., in the month of August. And so Kevin McCarthy has said when we get back, we're going to get together, as we always do, as a GOP conference. And this will be one of the topics we discuss, because I have been in media, at least media has reported that there are at least a couple of the Republican U.S. House members that are not comfortable proceeding with that yet. And so I haven't talked to them directly, and that would be the whip's count if we decide to do this. The whip would make sure that we have enough votes to get this passed on the floor of the House of Representatives. But certainly I would say the vast majority of Republicans are ready to go ahead with this. That doesn't mean that it will be an impeachment, but what it does mean is that we will have more authority to do what we need to do to get the information that we need, because there's so much stuff. It just seems very, very, I don't know if suspicious is even a strong enough word, when Joe Biden, as a vice president, takes his son Hunter Biden and flies him on Air Force Two, and they go to China and they go to Ukraine, and then he's on the phone with Hunter Biden's potential clients, and his business partner, Devin Archer, testified that he would do that because it was the Biden brand and it would give him influence. And then you have the Burisma Energy Company from Ukraine, where Hunter Biden was getting paid $83,000 a month to be on the board, even though he had no energy experience. Yeah. And then they pressured him to, try to have pressure on Washington, D.C. to remove that investigator, that prosecutor that was trying to go after Burisma. And then sure enough, Biden got them to do that by threatening to take away $1 billion amount of money from Ukraine, and the guy was fired. And of course, then millions of dollars are coming in from China, from Ukraine, from Romania. It's all very, very suspicious.
Well, and don't forget the widow of that Moscow mayor, the $3.5 million. Yeah. And it's interesting. You said that there's still some Republicans that aren't comfortable with an impeachment inquiry, and I don't mean to be snarky, but what else do they need to hear? I guess would be my question. I mean, perhaps they feel like they're getting James Comer and Jim Jordan and the folks in the various committees. Do they feel like they're getting enough cooperation so that they don't necessarily need to have an impeachment inquiry? I mean, because if you base it on the evidence, I mean, Lord, you just rattled off the evidence, and there's a lot more than that. But we only have a few minutes. So what else do these folks need to hear?
I don't know, because I don't sit in their shoes. I'm already convinced. And so, some of them I would suspect are Republicans that won their election when Biden won their district, and so
Yes.
they're in districts that Biden won, and so they're not sure if they go against Biden, if that's going to hurt them in their reelection. I imagine some people maybe just aren't at a point yet, they haven't studied it enough to determine it, but that's why we have these GOP conference meetings. So we'll be back in Washington, D.C. on September 12th. And we usually, the very following next day, that morning, we usually have a conference meeting. And I would imagine that this will be one of the top topics that we will be discussing. And so there will be a push for it. My sense from just a phone call, we had a conference phone call we had recently, is that Speaker McCarthy is ready to go ahead with it. And I'm not putting words in his mouth, but that's what it appears like to me.
Let me ask, getting away from the corruption, because, we could go for hours on that. But, when you look at where Joe Biden is from a policy standpoint, the other day he's bellowing about, name one thing that America has failed at. And, of course, the entire nation of conservatives scream Afghanistan, which is one of many failures of the Biden administration. I guess when you look at the overall body of work of Joe Biden over the last 2.5 years, he's done pretty good at destroying the country. And so you look at the border, you're, of course, in Arizona. You look at the border, that's a train wreck. You look at the economy, that's a train wreck. You do look at, what's going on with, Ukraine. You look at what's going on with crime in the streets all across America. I mean, I could go on and on, of course, the economy as well. Overall, I mean, things are not going well for the Biden administration. From your standpoint in the House of Representatives, I understand you feel like he's probably done a terrible job. I think we would all agree on that. But what can we do moving forward? I mean, we have another election coming up. I would assume that you anticipate keeping the House.
Well, I sure hope so. I mean, elections have consequences. And when I go around talking to people, I talk about the different things that the Biden administration is doing. To give you an example, his proposed rule by the EPA under the Biden administration that will effectively require that 2/3 of all newly manufactured cars are all electric by the year 2032. Well, most people don't know that. They hadn't heard about it. And so it's up to us to educate people and then tell them how it works. So when I go to these meetings, I say, listen, we have a Republican majority in the House. I tell them what that means, that then the chairman of all of the committees are Republican. They decide what bills are getting passed. But then we're passing in the House a bunch of bills to stop all this craziness that the Biden administration is doing. We passed a bill back in May to secure the border, but then it gets stuck in the Senate because the Senate has Democrat majority. And so I feel it's incumbent on me to educate people what is happening, because most people really do not understand the process at all.
One of the frustrating things for me is when Karine Jean-Pierre will say, well, the Republicans haven't come forward with a plan or legislation to fix the problems on the southern border. And I mean, I'm screaming to the heavens that, yes, in the House of Representatives, the Republicans have brought great ideas for, immigration reform and protecting the border and so forth. And you're absolutely right. It does get stuck in the Senate. And of course, Joe Biden doesn't want to do anything about it either. So there's a lot of spin. I'll even call it lying coming from the White House as far as what is going on the southern border. I don't feel sorry for New York. I don't feel sorry for Washington, D.C. I don't feel sorry for any of these sanctuary cities that are now being overrun with illegal aliens or migrants, whatever you want to call them, because that is what Joe Biden wants. And that's what the people of those cities have voted for. I don't know what else there is to say about that, except from your vantage point in Arizona, how's the border problem going there?
The border is a disaster. And as you said, Biden and the Democrats want a wide open border. All of their policies, all of their actions lead to that result that they want an open border, and they're using the Customs and Border Patrol officers as travel agents. They process all of these people that are coming here illegally, and they process them, and they send them off via different modes of transportation to different parts of the country. And one of the things that's really outrageous, there's a lot of outrageous things, but I just, Secretary of Health and Human Services Becerra just came in front of the committee I serve on. They're supposed to be vetting the sponsors of where they're sending these unaccompanied children. They're not vetting them. And so these girls, young boys, are being sold into sex slavery. So now they're paying off the cartel members for traveling here and getting across the border, plus they're paying off the sponsors that our own government is sending these poor kids to. This is outrageous. And it just boggles my mind that the Democrats don't care about it. They don't care about how they are selling these kids into sex slavery, and they're using them as drug mules. It's just so sad. It's sad. I'm angry. I'm sad, and I'm frustrated.
And you know, it's interesting. You use the phrase boggles the mind. It does boggle the mind because if I remember correctly, even the New York Times reported on the child trafficking and these kids getting sold into slavery and, you know, working horrific jobs and all of these things. Yet, for whatever reason, you have the White House press corps, very few of them will actually ask the question of Joe Biden, if they can get to him, or Karine Jean-Pierre, and really ask them to give an acceptable answer that doesn't obfuscate the truth. And so I think that, you know, at least for me, you have the legacy media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the networks and so forth. You know, they're culpable in this, too, because as you just mentioned a few moments ago, part of your job is educating the public. Unfortunately, it's like you have to do the media's job for the media because they're not doing it by and large.
Well, they definitely are not doing the job. They're very pro-Democrat. They're very pro-Joe Biden. And so on the border, for instance, in June of 2020, there were 33 illegal crossings on the southern border. You fast forward to June of 2023, there is 145,000 crossings. What's the difference? In June of 2020, it was Trump policies. In June of 2023, it was Joe Biden's policies. If you look at the economy here in Phoenix, our gasoline prices are now $4.49 a gallon in Phoenix. This is crazy. Our electricity prices are going up. People cannot afford to live anymore. Mortgage rates are going up. People literally are not able to live in a house. Our homeless rates are going up. It is a total disaster. The Biden administration and its policies are a total disaster, and that is the sole reason that I stay in this job is to try to save our country.
You know, I'm looking at, and I'm chuckling just because I love it. I'm looking at some of the other legislation that you have submitted. You've reintroduced the Women's Bill of Rights. I love that. The Save Our Stoves Act. I love that. Very quickly with the Women's Bill of Rights, talk about why you felt the need to do that. I know why you did, but let's educate folks who may not know.
Well, the Biden administration, the Democrats are prioritizing transgenders over women, and it's discriminating over women. So my Women's Bill of Rights defines what a woman is. It defines this is what a woman is, this is what a man is, because it's very important in federal law and all of our legislation that we define what a woman is and what a man is, because unfortunately the Democrats are messing it all up, and they're allowing males to compete in women's sports. They're allowing teenage boys to go in teenage girls' showers and bathrooms. And this is wrong. And I have to stand up for it. And I am usually the outspoken woman who gets called all kinds of names, like I'm against transgenders and all this stuff. And I said, no, You're discriminating against women. We have fought for years to get equal rights, and now you are taking them away. And it boggles my mind, once again, that the Democrats care more about transgenders and prioritize them over women. Now, I don't want to discriminate against anybody, but they are discriminating against women, and it needs to stop.
Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, thank you very much for joining us here on WMAL. What a great conversation. 4:57 on News Talk 105.9 FM, WMAL. All right, I've got a very specific question for you, the WMAL listening audience. Do you or do you not care that Donald Trump is not going to participate in the Republican primary debate next week? Does it matter to you? Do you wish that he would? Do you think he's a chicken like Chris Christie says? Or do you understand what he is doing when he says, nope, I don't need to do that? 888-630-WMAL is the phone number. Call now.